Virtual machine automatic balancing in Hyper-V 2016. Okay, what is automatic balancing of VM? Well, as we know, in Hyper-V cluster, we have several nodes. Like in my case, I have three nodes, Hyper 1, Hyper 2, Hyper 3. So if I create one VM, two VM, 10 VMs in a cluster, those VMs will be taking their resources, means CPU, memory, network, right, from these nodes. And those VM will be running on these nodes. What you want is you don't want you or what you want, let's say, you want to balance VM across all nodes. The load which we put by those VMs, you want to balance it across all nodes. You don't, for example, I have four VMs here, server 1, server 2, server 3, server 4. I don't, I would not like all these four VMs to run on Hyper 1 and Hyper 2 and Hyper 3 remain free. In this case, Hyper 1 will be totally saturated or let's say under heavy load, and Hyper 2 and Hyper 3 doing nothing, literally nothing, because there is no VM running on Hyper 2 and Hyper 3. Means Hyper 2 and Hyper 3 resources are not utilized, as well as Hyper 2 and Hyper 3 are not reading or accessing virtual machine shared files, right? So single, in this case, single node Hyper 1 giving all the required CPU, memory, and network resources to all VMs, as well as it's the only server who is accessing the shared storage and reading actively virtual machine, virtual disks. So that can also slow down. Imagine that. What I would like to do that instead of just one VM, I would like, if I have, like in this case, three hosts, I would like them to contribute equally or as much as equally as possible. So the load is evenly distributed. It will give better performance for host. It will give better performance for VM from resources perspective as well as accessing storage perspective as well, right? So that's what load balancing is all about. When we talk about virtual machine load balancing, in Hyper-V cluster, it's automatically enabled. So if I go to the properties of Hypercluster 1, there is a tab called Balance. And as you can see, enable automatic balancing of virtual machines. It's selected by default. So in Windows Server 2016, whenever you create a Hyper-V cluster, this is enabled by default, and by default, the mode is always load balance. Another option is load balance to a node when it joins. So let's say, for example, if I change to this one and I add another node, let's say hyper 4. So at that time only the load will be balanced. That's it. Always load balance. Doesn't matter do I add a node or not. Whenever Hyper-V thinks that some VMs, for example, server 1, can get better performance if it's live migrated to from Hyper 1 to Hyper 3, it will automatically do so. So what it will do, it will use live migration feature of Hyper-V to live migrate VMs as required to balance the load across all nodes which are participating in a cluster. So that's why live migration or setting up live migration is very important in order to utilize this load balancing feature. As far as the aggressiveness levels are concerned, by default there are three levels: high, low, and medium. Sorry, there are three levels, and by default low is selected. What's the definition of these aggressiveness levels? Let me just show you real quick here. If I am at the right place. Yeah, here. Level 1, which is low aggressiveness, means move VMs when the host is more than 80% loaded. You can set it to 2 as well, which is the medium aggressiveness. You can't say 1, 2, 3 in the GUI. All you can see is low, medium, and high. So when you set to low, it means it's 1. When you set to medium, it's 2. It means move VMs when the host is more than 70% loaded. And high aggressiveness means auto balancer level 3. It means average nodes and move when the host is more than 5% above average. So what it will do, it will automatically balance the load across all nodes and to make an average, equal average across all nodes. And whenever a host is more than 5% above average load that you have in your cluster, it will move VM. So it will, how the average will be utilized, it depends on the load that you have on your cluster. There is no definition of average. It depends on the load that you have in your failover clustering, and average will be calculated based on the load available on each host divided by the number of hosts, and that will be your average value. If you want to use PowerShell, then that's how you can set like get cluster dot automatic, or sorry, auto balance load balance or auto balancer mode 2 or auto balancer level 2, and you know that's how you can set it. Auto balancer 3 is high, auto balancer 1 is low. Mode and level. So if you want to do it through GUI, as I said, you can just go here, always load mode 2, always load balance, and aggressiveness here. These are the levels. So level 1, level 2, level 3. Let me set it to 3. So in this case, my cluster is running in aggressive mode, means it will calculate an average, and whenever a host is 5% above average, it will try to move VMs to make it even. You don't have to use aggressive value. You may select to medium, which is if you are okay with 70%, or low when it's okay with 80% of the load, as you can see. So just to summarize, failover cluster manager have a feature in Server 2016. Hyper-V failover cluster have a feature called automatic balancing of VMs, and it's enabled by default. By default, the value is set to low, but you can change it to whatever you like. And it would automatically live migrate VMs across participating nodes in a cluster to balance the load, to make sure that the load is even Steven and all nodes are properly utilized and not a single node is saturated or under contention or, you know, overloaded. So that's what Hyper-V automatic VM load balancing is. Thank you so much for watching, and please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.